you ever wondered if there was something more deeply hidden behind things? Several years ago, I was at a Barnes & Noble, and we had just had some beautiful buzz that had come out about a book that we had just released. And it was about a very inspiring subject by the name of Melissa. And all of that buzz was so intoxicating. And I think the Barnes & Noble store manager was just as intoxicated because he said, "Your job is to greet every customer as they come in the store and get them to buy an autographed copy of your book." Which sounds really great, right? Except for the name was Shattered Silence, the Untold Story of a Serial Killer's Daughter. So as you can imagine, it wasn't everyone's cup of tea. Most people were actually really great, and it was wonderful, and sales were wonderful, but the people were amazing. However, I'll never forget one woman who looked at me with abject horror in her eyes. "I will never read a book like that, and you can't make me." Okay, I said, and I knew all 200 eyes in Barnes & Noble were now upon me. But I couldn't be offended because I knew that this was not a salacious true crime story. I knew that what this was a human journey, maybe like yours, maybe like mine, where she was plunged into utter darkness. And unlike most of you, I hope, she had a psychopath for a father. So imagine the stories that she used to tell herself as she hid away and played small. But Melissa eventually rose. She gathered her sword and her shield to slay the dragon, and now she is one of those women that shines one of the brightest lights on the planet. Well, I gotta tell you, every story that we tell ourselves is so important. In fact, the stories that we tell ourselves are the most important stories on the planet. And why is that? Because we believe them. And we are actually a microcosm of what is happening around the world. And the stories that we tell ourselves affects ourselves, our family, our community, our nation, and the world. And we might think, oh, it's no big deal. I can just, brush some of the trauma under the rug. It's not a big deal. I can push it down. I can hide from it. But here's what I will tell you is that research has proven that if we're not dealing with our emotional traumas, that guess what happens? It manifests itself in our body in the form of disease. And if that's not enough for you, what I would love to share is that most of the time, we don't think that, the health is not a big enough threat to us. But recent research has shown that we're actually passing our trauma down from generation to generation to generation in our DNA. And not just to those that we are genetically attached to, but also those who are in our environment. So it is important for you to heal your stories. And this I know, is that you will walk through fire to save and protect someone that you love. That's the good news. The bad news is you got to do it for yourself the first time. So I know that it can be scary. I know that sometimes it can be frightening to face the darkest things within our souls. Remember the woman with these books? I got to tell you, a few weeks later, I was at another Barnes & Noble, so imagine my surprise when she comes up and she has a stack of 8 or 9 books. I looked at her in absolute shock. It's like, and she had tears in her eyes. And she said, "I didn't want to read your book." I'm like, "I know." And then she said, "My best friend said I had to read this book, that it was a book that every woman should read." She said, so begrudgingly, I picked it up. And I read it in 2 days. And with tears streaming down her cheeks, she said, "I want to buy one for each of my daughters and my daughters-in-law. Would you be willing to sign this?" I said, "You bet." And I never, ever forgot her story of courage. You see, this woman could have avoided me for the rest of her life, right? Like we could have been in a nursing home together and she could have transferred. We were like 140. But no, she did something extraordinary. She learned from her experience. She changed her story. And then, miracle of miracles, she took what she had learned and served other people. She became a teacher and a leader. But I got to tell you, I have not always been a leader. In fact, when I was little, I had a wounding so deep that it colored every story that I told myself. You see, I had 3 sets of parents by the time I was 6 months old. And so the story I was telling myself is that the big people would never stick around. So by the time I was in my early 20s, these stories had become monstrous, just absolutely monstrous. And the problem with it was that they colored every behavior that I had. So then I would have utterly horrible behavior, which would reinforce the stories that I was telling about myself. Does that sound familiar to anyone? It got so bad that I did manifest disease within my body. I ended up in the hospital, and I'm listening to a couple nurses out in the corridor who don't think that I can hear them say, "She's not going to make it until morning." And I got to tell you, I had lost 30 pounds in 3 days. I was so emaciated and so much pain that I really was past the point of being afraid if I were to lose my life. However, I knew that I had not fulfilled the measure of my creation. And as I lay there in the wet tears of a wasted life, I felt undone. And it was in that moment that a beautiful presence came and filled my room with unconditional love, unlike anything I had ever felt in my entire life. Like I was in my body and I was above my body and I was around my body. Every atom in that room, every cell in my body was vibrating with this beautiful light and love. It was the most powerful experience I had ever had. And the beautiful thing of it is that I was given a second chance at life. I was given specific knowledge that saved my life while I was right there in the hospital. But the coolest thing was that God helped me retell stories. God helped me to shift out of some of those false beliefs that I had. I'd like to tell you that I was like perfect, but we're kind of messy as humans, aren't we? So I'm still working on that. I don't know about you. But here's the thing. I had that experience. It also made me not afraid of any other human on the planet. Like people that I was once afraid of, I was not afraid of anymore. I started working with gang kids in Denver, and I got to hear some of the most entrenched stories of these kids. And the stories that they told themselves knocked me off my socks. Or knocked my socks off, whichever. But I will tell you this. Some of those Bloods and Crips and Nuestra Familia members became some of the most incredible souls I ever met. And that's when I fell in love with the human soul. And I was able to write a book about a former skinhead who changed his life. And then that led me to Melissa's incredible story. And her story helped me in my story to finally overcome abuse as an adult. And it laid the groundwork for something even more amazing that would come along and come along and come along. But I still was hiding behind everybody else's story. Does that sound familiar? I had the opportunity to meet an incredible woman, a lot like Melissa, changed my world immediately. She was the 19th wife of 65 women. Can you imagine? And when she was only 19 years of age, she was forced to marry a man more than 4 times her age. And when he died, a new man became the prophet, his son Warren Jeffs, who you may have heard of. He became the prophet and he became a dictator. And he dictated every single person's life and marriages. And Rebecca had to face, am I going to stay here as I'm watching little girls, 15, 14, 13, 12, be married in the name of God? or am I going to do something? So she escaped, and later on, she had to face her own stories. She ended up testifying over 20 times in a court of law and helped put a pedophile behind bars for life plus 20 years. Wow, I'll tell you what. One of my favorite things, though, is Warren had outlawed the color red. So 10,000 people, they complied. No one wore red, but guess what? Rebecca wore every time she came sashaying into the courtroom. It was her way of saying, you did not break me. And Rebecca's example helped me to see the power of one soul like yours to change the world, to change your world, and then to step up and change the world. So what I want to share with you is I began to experiment with being a leader. So I started a phone book, a trucking company, and a beautiful nonprofit that has gone worldwide with the help of so many of my dear Shiro sisters. I began experimenting with some of those things. But I got to tell you, I had an opportunity to begin writing a book that rocked my world. So Alesha Johnson, her father was murdered aboard a naval vessel when she was just 2.5 years old. And everyone told her, oh, you're so lucky because you're too young to grieve. But she ached for her father. And when she became a young adult, he actually came back from the other side. And he led her into some of the most extraordinary experiences, meeting his shipmates and others who could tell her what her father was like. And then she sent me to Burlington, Vermont, to face her father's killer. All we knew as I showed up on his doorstep was that he had escaped from the U.S. Navy, and he might still be a killer at large. But I also knew he had a story, and something within me said it had to be told. And so I show up on the doorstep. It's freezing outside. I have a burly bodyguard. He's my friend, right? And a hardened ex-Navy SEAL who's like doing surveillance and checking things out. And we have a getaway car around the other side of the house. And it was like, oh my gosh, this is like, whoa. So I stepped up to the door and knocked on that door with my heart just pounding, not knowing what was going to greet us on the other side. But here's what I will share with you. The terror that I felt that night on the doorstep was nothing compared to me having to face my own story of adoption. So this extraordinary thing happened. One of my authors, as a thank you gift, sent me a DNA kit. She said, I don't think your own personal story is going to be complete until you submit this and know where you really come from. And I was like, oh boy. And it sat on my desk for weeks and weeks, and it took everything I had to submit that test. And what I will share with you is that the story that I told myself was like, oh, I could be fascinated by looking up my history, right? My ancestors, and I can be fascinated by all the medical things that I'll find out. Well, imagine my surprise when I discovered that there was something more deeply hidden behind things. Imagine my surprise when I found out that I had a direct relative. Imagine my surprise when I found out that they lived less than 7 minutes from me after having been across the nation. And imagine my surprise to find out that it was my mother's twin brother. And then imagine what it was like to look into his eyes, loving and familiar, and for the first time to see the reflection of love there. So what I want to share with you is he shared with me for the first time stories of my mom, my dad, my grandparents, and my great-grandparents who I had never met. And then he sat across from me and he said, what next? Because, there's not always happy endings, right? I had a friend who found his mom and she had died 3 months before. I had another friend whose mom said, you are still a secret. I'd been a secret for 51 years. What if she didn't want this? But because of the love that Eric and Jan gave to me, guess what? I was like, I got this. And I wanted to honor whatever she felt because it was her story, right? It was her story. So here's the cool thing. About 2 days later only, I get a call from Uncle Eric. He had talked with Carla, my mother, and she began to sob. I was hoping she would find me, she said. I've been praying for years that she would find me. And all my old stories went away, especially when I got to see her for the first time, hug her for what felt like 3 hours, and hold her for eternity. You see, there is something deeply hidden behind each of our stories, if we give it credit, right? You might call it Allah, or God, or Vishnu, or maybe it's the Great Spirit, or El Shaddai, or the I am that I am. There is something that cares deeply about your stories. And you're gonna have to walk through fire. But I promise you, miracles are waiting on the other side. So here's the thing. I just discovered in the last few months that I have 59 new immediate family members. And some of them are actually here in the audience. And what I would also love to share with you is that one of my very favorite people on the planet was Einstein. And he was one that allowed both science and spirituality to come together. So instead of cutting a piece of himself off like so many of us do when the stories don't want to mesh, he said, I'm going to be open to all of the knowledge, all of the inspiration of the universe. And he was. And when he was only 6 years old, his father bought him a compass. And as he watched it move to magnetic north, he said, oh, there must be something deeply hidden behind things. And he allowed his destiny to be manifest. So here's the thing. Harold Goddard said, the destiny of the world is determined less by the battles lost and won than by the stories it loves and believes in. I want to share with you how profound that is, because the destiny of your world is determined less by the battles lost and won than by the stories you love and believe in. So here's my challenge to you. Whatever terrifies you is the seeds of your greatest glory. Whatever that darkness is, it's your opportunity to go into the dark cave and to come out on the other side, wielding your sword and shield and slaying your own dragons. And when you do that, you have the opportunity to become a healer, a teacher, a leader. There is no accidents, the things that have happened in your story. And I promise those miracles are waiting. I just want to share one last thing. Einstein, my friend, right? He would watch these films back in the day of this little diminutive man who had millions of people following him. And he was always putting his hands together like this and pressing them together. And he'd say this one word. Einstein says, I gotta know what that one word is. What is that one word? So he wrote to Gandhi. See, he's going to take action. Wrote to Gandhi and said, what is that one word? And Gandhi said, the divine in me recognizes and celebrates the divine in you. Namaste. Namaste. Thank you.